the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you are answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for inviting me, Dr. Sarkar, and the Stevens family. I'm thrilled to be here. I've lived in New Jersey pretty much my whole life, spent about 8 years in Jersey City through Sandy. While I was doing my capstone at Columbia in sustainability management, the power went out and I took my backup power supply, those little UPS lead acid batteries, and I plugged in a little off-grid thing with like a lamp and the computer and a little hotspot so that I could continue to work on our capstone, which was coincidentally a net zero energy feasibility study for the Natural Resources Defense Council's headquarters in Manhattan, which also went dark and had all their fire pumps and everything shut off. So my sustainability experience was trial by fire, and that was 4 years ago. The outline for today's talk is really to give an overview of a day in a life for a sustainability consultant, but my day is not that exciting, so I'm not going to take you through 9 to 5, or I have a baby, so 5 a.m. to midnight and then to 2 a.m. schedule. We won't do that. I'm going to take you through some actual practical cases of client work that my firm works on, and I'm going to focus on, touch on a few key must-have tools that I use pretty much every day as a sustainability consultant. And then I'm going to kind of paint for conversation for those who can stick around afterwards, or if we have time at the end, some of the major challenges, some of the inertia points on why sustainability consultants aren't more effective, or why I'm not as effective as I would like to be in having my role at preventing climate change and improving the livelihoods of people in the first mile of supply chains, and some of the other things that me and my team aspire to. So the name of the game today is a very transparent and honest look at this profession through my lens, which is going to be a little bit different than folks that are working at big 5 firms in sustainability consulting. Mine is very much a generalist firm. It's a boutique group called Third Partners out of New York City, and you'll see that we work with clients across all different sectors. So I'd like this to be kind of a crash course in the firm that we've created, but also get your feedback on areas where we can do more, okay? So a little bit about my journey into sustainability consulting, because this profession didn't really exist 10 years ago. It did in the environmental sense, but it didn't in terms of environmental social governance and actual corporate sustainability. This is a relatively new construct. So I'll talk a little bit about my personal background, my journey, and what we're up to today, and then we'll transition into looking at some of the actual clients and work. So this is the kind of elevator pitch that my team has on our website. This will all be changing, but we say that sustainability has a lot of different names. It means different things to different people, right? The blind people in the elephant analogy, that someone touches it and thinks it's a tail, someone else touches it and thinks it's a snake, and all this stuff. I mean, that's very much still going on. So our motto is corporate responsibility, sustainability, innovation, resilience. No matter what you call it, it's really about the strategy, the data, the execution, and communication. That's how the firm approaches it and how we're positioning this today in the market as sustainability consultants, trying to meet people where they are. In my own life, as we alluded to with HGTV, I've tried to live sustainability throughout my whole career and in my private life before that. My wife and I were, in fact, kind of headhunted for HGTV's Tiny House Hunters, which is the pilot that I think might still be buried somewhere on Netflix of this series that's now in its 5th or more season. Because we were in the process of looking for a space to build an off-grid solar-powered tiny house that would be within a 2-hour radius of New York City, so that it wasn't a whole bunch of fossil fuels to get out there, kind of as a weekend place or a second home. And this show found us, so we had our 15 minutes of TV fame. But the interesting thing was there wasn't one shot throughout this series of our off-grid solar array that I'm very proud of. It was a carefully engineered, finely balanced system where this house provides all of the energy it needs from solar power. And the feedback from this show afterwards, we were called some interesting things that I have a thick skin, so I'm okay with the feedback from the Twitterverse, but I was called an environmentalist wacko that wants to force my wife to live a certain way, and that we were voted most likely to end in a murder-suicide. So there was this, if you watch the show, there was this tension built up between me and my wife over wanting to live a certain way, which is what TV does best. But the interesting thing was, on the renewable energy stuff, America just doesn't get it. There are a lot of people that just don't get it. I'm someone who tries to live every day and in my work with corporate clientele as someone who gets it, who gets what it's like to be in the boardroom defending a sustainability budget, if that's even a thing in organizations, or defending an investment in a major renewable energy system or a virtual PPA or any number of things that companies can do to actually take action on their footprint and not just make themselves less bad, but hopefully move toward a regenerative economy. You have to be able to defend those things. You have to be able to have a strong business rationale in this field, but it's complicated. So for me to try to simplify it, the way I approach every day is giving clients sound advisory that's driven by my value set, not that they're ever going to be off the grid, but backed up by a competent mixed analysis, financial, environmental, social. And every consultancy, including my own, has their own methodology or framework for delivering on that, right? But to be very clear, this is a little bit different than the environmental consulting of yesteryear that was about compliance, for example, or about environmental health and safety, things you had to do in response to policy, in response to pollution regulation, in response to even something like a cap and trade or a law that goes into effect capping carbon emissions. All of those things are driven, they're not voluntary. We very much operate in the world of voluntary sustainability, in the intersection between this concept of people, planet, profit, what kind of a future most of the folks in this room see themselves building for their families and for the world, and what we can actually get done inside of companies. So this is a very tricky thing at times to balance, because we are a firm that needs to get purchase orders and get contracts with companies, but we also have our compass to guide us. So this is just I'll take you through now some examples of clients and actual real work that we do. This is a snapshot of just some of the organizations that I've had the privilege of working with just in the past 3 years or so. Some are active, some are past. It's across all different sectors. It's Fortune 1000, it's startups, it's unicorns, right? Startup companies that are on their way to $1 billion and are now growing so fast they want to figure out how to be more responsible. So it's a cross-section. And that's been very, very interesting work to have so many different clients in so many different sectors. So I'll go through a few cases. This is as close as we can get to kind of day in the life. I've got 3 of these. And the first deals with what we did for a big omni-channel media company. So just to give you an idea of what the work actually looks like, this particular project involved helping the C-suite explore different strategic options for how they would define and elevate and enhance sustainability in the organization over time, talking to a whole bunch of different managers that brought all different viewpoints, everybody from the chief information officer who was looking at expanding company data centers and outsourced data centers, to the CEO, the CFO, folks in creative. So very much as a consultant, you are listening, you are having lots of meetings with lots of different people and kind of figuring out what their agenda is, all the while they try to probe you and figure out your agenda, which in this case was helping senior management understand their position relative to peers, understanding what it means to walk the talk on sustainability for a firm that had very, very strong environmental and social values that they lived every day through their core business and their work. Right? So walking the talk was a big theme on this project. Some of the deliverables, as we call them in management consulting, included guides to help make better procurement decisions to line up company values with the things that the firm buys, doing audits on the production of a magazine, looking at certified paper, forestry protection. It was heavily centered around buildings while this firm was building out a new world-class headquarters in New York City. So there was a green buildings component, but they desired to kind of go beyond LEED, go beyond box checking and sort of getting the plaque to doing things that were really, really out there. So very, very fun project. Tactically, we'll find ourselves helping staff with run actual programs on campus or on site, like an e-waste recycling drive, right? So we're actually putting up posters and arranging an e-waste vendor and vetting that e-waste vendor to make sure that the electronic waste goes to the right place and at the end of life, and bringing in programs like that. So it's a combination of strategy and hands-on in this case for this particular organization. In another case, we found ourselves working for a big financial institution to essentially do a feasibility study to go carbon neutral over 5 years. And this engagement resulted in the firm announcing a commitment to carbon neutrality and a roadmap to get there that included direct and indirect investments in new wind energy, right? So the concept of if you are a large distributed company with a lot of leased office spaces, there's only so much you can do with green infrastructure on your own roof. So Stevens is 5% solar powered is great, right? That represents probably tens of thousands of square feet of solar in a dense urban area with lots of shading and lots of barriers to getting there. If you don't own your property, if you don't own your campus, and you lease your buildings, your hands are shackled even more. You'll never reach 5%, let alone 1%, or find anybody who will finance that project, yet you want to negate or neutralize your Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions in this case. So the way that my firm recommended they do that was to explore off-site renewable energy that was legitimate, that was new construction of utility scale wind, that this firm would help to actually instigate and finance and bring online. So that's called the virtual PPA. It's a trend in renewable energy development that's important to watch because started with Apple and Google, some of the usual suspects leading this movement, but you can absolutely mobilize finance and develop your own wind and solar assets, mostly wind because of the economics, away from where your property is located, sometimes within the same grid region, sometimes outside of it altogether, and take the benefits of that project with the right conditions. So this program involved everything for the decision support up to, but not including project finance and vetting actual sites for these wind developments. This customer had their own in-house team that was capable of doing that. So we had more or less to navigate the strategy. What would this look like from a CapEx perspective? How legitimate would this strategy and this announcement be relative to peers to make sure that it was bulletproof, because they wanted to do the right thing, but they wanted to do it without a whole lot of financial outlay or without any financial outlay. And the third type of work that we're involved with as a theme is around data, either in support of research and development or sometimes in support of marketing claims, okay? So in this case, this is a kind of a project that's publicly known. They're now called Just, but they were known as Hampton Creek. This is a food technology company that is trying to change the way that people eat and change the entire paradigm of environmental impact. They're doing some really interesting things. You might even have this on campus. They sell to a lot of food service organizations a mayonnaise that's made without eggs. So it's going beyond cruelty-free. It's going beyond, we let our chickens roam, and we have certified organic. There are no animal products. This is entirely plant-based food company that makes mainstream products like mayo that previously had animal-derived ingredients, and they've since moved on to meat. So they're pioneering something I think they refer to as clean meat, and they're one of the many folks doing lab-cultured, basically synthesized meat to enter our food system. And they had developed a kind of environmental footprint to compare. It was a comparative analysis using LCA style techniques and modeling, and they needed an outside firm that wasn't biased, that wasn't part of their own R&D organization, to come in and look at that work with fresh eyes, make recommendations about how to make that work more rigorous, and also to work with them on how they message it to the market. So in sustainability consulting speak, you might call this validation. but it was a little more collaborative than that because we were working between their marketing teams and people involved in product development, sourcing, and R&D to kind of look at what they had done and think about how you talk about the benefits of this particular product relative to the entrenched alternatives. So as a result of this work, they went out and publicized some claims. They said, here's these giant water and emission savings, asterisk, 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 verified by third partners and our own internal data model. And they open sourced that data model, which was really great. A lot of LCAs are made public, but this was a big deal because this firm has some proprietary R&D in their products here that's very much on the cutting edge, and it was interesting and kind of forward thinking for them to actually open source this pretty detailed methodology and to try to develop a whole data model that could actually serve them into the future. So we didn't build the data model in this case. We came in to partner with them after it was developed to validate it, verify it, and talk about how to responsibly message it. Similarly, I'm involved with a startup called Thread. They go by the name Thread or Thread International that works in Haiti, Honduras, and they're expanding all over the world to take plastic bottles that would be washed into the ocean and create jobs in very, very poor economies, collecting those bottles, cleaning them, flaking them, and getting them into manufacturing process for apparel. So we have had well, I have a hands-on role in this company as an advisor, as a board member for its affiliated NGO, and we did a kind of mini LCA project around one of their projects with Timberland, where they have the entire upper from this iconic Timberland boot made from recycled plastic bottles that were on the streets of Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and in Honduras, and people there picked them up, collected them, brought them to a collection center. Thread converts them into PET, and they go into products. So similarly, this falls into decision support and also helping to support public-facing claims. And to do this, we had to kind of do a mini LCA, and that's one of the tools I'll talk about as kind of being key to this type of work if you want to do it the honest way, right? If you're a marketing agency that helps people with sustainability reports, you could maybe advise a company like this on how not to get accused of greenwashing, how not to have your competitor come out and write a nasty article about you the next day saying, well, these claims they made, they created some jobs, but there's no proof that plastic would have ended up in the ocean. Then the carbon savings, that wasn't additional, right? There's a very competitive environment in the consumer product space around green marketing. So we don't just do the positioning work, we actually do roll up our sleeves and do the calculations, do the analysis, which involved using emissions factors and sort of LCA methodologies that we learned at Columbia in order to deliver a responsible result. So it's not protecting them from scrutiny, this is helping them sell more product to an iconic brand that has then, since then, engaged in more purchase orders with them, helped employ more people in Port-au-Prince and elsewhere. So we're surrounded by some pretty cool clients and companies, which has been a big part of why I love this job. But those are just 3 examples of projects that involved, in some cases, a lot of different services. So now I'm going to try to break down sustainability consulting services as I know them in this boutique world of full service management consulting to brands and to corporations into 2 different categories. I like to say that we're either delivering or supporting solutions that already exist. The green building movement, for example, carbon footprinting, things that are tried and true that are now part of the green economy. Or we're operating on the other side of that line and we're creating demand for new solutions that lead to a future that we're going to be proud of. And it's decidedly harder to make a living consistently doing the latter, okay? You have to find companies that are not only mission aligned, but are willing to step outside the box and plug sustainability, not just in with marketing or with compliance or environmental health and safety, but with their innovation pipeline. So in some cases, we go and find them, right? Some of those logos, we went and found them and said, we love what you're doing, and we think we can have a bigger impact together. And they said, okay, let's do this. In other cases, they find you, okay? But in that first bucket, the kind of commoditized sustainability offerings where you'll find a lot of traditional and non-traditional consultancies operating, in some cases competing, would include healthy and sustainable buildings, renewable energy advisory and finance, product and supply chain optimization, EHS, operational resilience, risk assessments, and this emerging movement of circularity, either in the design process or in end of life and waste and beyond. And of course, carbon footprinting or management can kind of be broken down into measurement, standards for disclosure, like applying the GHG protocol to quantify companies' scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. These would be things that hopefully, my father-in-law thinks I do for a living. His understanding, it's like, oh, Adam's in sustainability consulting. He does green buildings. He does LEED. We haven't done a single LEED project, but we have done some projects where the client said we'd rather, instead of spending $50,000 on just the LEED certification, we'd rather incorporate all of that, go 2 steps beyond, and have a team that's thinking about net zero. That's has this pedigree to be able to take it to the next level. In terms of creating demand for new solutions for the future that we want to be proud of, you'll see some familiar terms in here that folks in this room and listening online might be familiar with. You might have seen a materiality assessment in the sustainability report for a very large corporation. It's kind of a 2-axis graph that says, here's what has a very high impact on people's perceptions of our company, and here are things that are tied in with our long-term financial success. So we're going to be focused on A, B, and C. But the purpose of the things on this list is to raise the bar. So this would be what my colleagues in other sustainability consultancies and at third partners say that I do for a living. Applying LCA, helping companies set their next 5-year sustainability goals, advising them on how to talk responsibly about issues involving water, waste, energy, and the whole kind of gamut of carbon management activities, right? And then there's a way to reframe all of this in a way that's not so much about a consulting deliverable. The people that who are closest to me would probably say that I aspire to help organizations define what matters most, to help cut through the clutter and make sense of what their priorities are by looking at their competitive landscape, applying some scientific rigor, helping to raise the bar on performance. That's another way of saying goal setting. But really, as a firm, we're often pressuring our clients, or they're pressuring us to help them go beyond just the next set of compulsory goals, right? But to align their own goal with science-based standards, science-based targets. What does it mean to be a company in X sector, and align your own company's decision-making and goal-setting process with the latest climate science? And how does that change when the UN and the IPCC come out with a report like they did just a few weeks ago that says, hey, we got the math off again and things are accelerating and the picture is even bleaker. Now 2 degrees C is this much closer to our time horizon. How do we take that type of data and bring it into the corporate goal-setting environment? That's a big challenge. Measurement is big. Data exists in all these different silos when it comes to sustainability. Other than just reporting the compulsory data points, how do you do responsible storytelling? How do you talk about supply chains and the real impacts that products have? So you'll notice a lot of companies, their standard of art for these days is to talk about scope 1 and 2 emissions and to join something like a renewable energy pledge that says you're going 100% green energy. But they're really only talking about their company operations. So if you're a brand, as we know from life cycle science and just having a broader perspective on things, the majority of your impact is overseas, starting in the first mile of your supply chain, either at the mine or the field where all products begin. And the concept of extended producer responsibility tells us that if we're going to tell stories responsibly, we're going to open up our consciousness to not just scope 1 and 2 and say we're going to be 100% green by buying certificates and offsets and RECs, but we're going to investigate our supply chain. We're going to look at social issues, the livelihoods of people in the first mile. We're going to at least quantify our scope 3 emissions and work with our partners to do something about it where it matters. Because these brands and companies have the power. They're causing new products to be brought to market, and we want to work with the ones that want to go all the way to the first mile, and hopefully reduce emissions on a global scale. I'm not going to kid anybody and say that companies are going to solve climate change or change the world. It's patently false. All the momentum that we've seen until now in climate change reinforces that, but they do have a strong role to play in terms of shaping the hearts and minds of people everywhere who don't necessarily understand the science the way that you all do. So within the companies we work with, there are typically these power centers who are responsible for decision making. Specifically, I mean hiring folks like us, or managing sustainability, governing it within the firm. And that's the Chief Executive Officer, Chief Sustainability Officer, the CMO or Chief Marketing Officer, and then the operations suite, which I've lumped in there, procurement as well. Okay? And if I wanted to break these down, these verticals, further into roles that you'll find for the people that we work with, who's our main day-to-day contact within a company. If we're on a CEO-driven project or a CSO-driven project, it'll probably be a sustainability or manager or director who's a generalist like us and doesn't have enough time in her day to do everything they need to do and are outsourcing some part of their job or looking at getting a third-party perspective. Okay, so that can include reporting, advising green teams, investor relations, which would be stakeholder engagement type of work. In the marketing vertical, that's where we find reporting usually living. It can be alongside brand communications or general marketing communications. Also, product development ends up in there too, so companies that are genuinely interested in R&D pipelines that assess the environmental and social impacts of products, they can start there within the marketing and product organization as well. And then all the way on the right, we have the operational sustainability realm, which is huge. And that's probably the longest operating ground for sustainability consultants and for this space are the built environment, facilities operations, as sustainability as an offshoot of total quality management, as an evolution of environmental health and safety, to just tack on another S. Now it's environmental health, safety, and sustainability. Okay, so that's where you'll find the more traditional work going on, but still a lot to be done. And if I put on top of this decision-making hierarchy actual deliverables, these are some of the types of projects that we've been involved with to those specific functions within organizations. All right. And this might be more for the sustainability consulting bootcamp, but how work gets delivered. This is the less glamorous part of sustainability consulting, is that delivering on all those lofty ideas and ideas about how we can make the world better require some pretty conventional business processes to get off the ground. So at any given time, me or the other 4 folks that I work with at Third Partners are at some point on this continuum, from scoping to contracting to delivering on work. All right? In the scoping process, we want to figure out who are the stakeholders within or outside the organization, a list of people or departments that we're going to be interacting with, the time frame, the type of fee structure, which tends to be either a project-based or a retainer if it's strategy type of work. We don't do all that much on hourly, although some of that work can have an hourly component for like overflow or things that end up out of scope. So we'll generally have a finite beginning and end and a list of outcomes that these decision makers want to see as part of a relationship. The contracting process, very standard. NDAs, confidentiality agreements, fly across the table pretty much on the first date. And then we put together a scope of work. There's some back and forth on that. We arrive at an agreement. Generally, most of our clients are 1,000 times bigger than us in staff revenue and legal department size. So what we'll do is take our scope of work and staple it onto a standard consulting agreement that they provide. It's a much easier, expedited process than trying to send our own contract to them and having them redline it, which we learned after the first couple projects that was the way to go. And delivery, which has a whole series of in-the-weeds steps. We're constantly managing critical paths and timelines, and in a firm my size, everyone's scoping the work, contracting the work, delivering the work at the same time, right? We don't have a lot of layers, so we've all become ninjas in consulting project delivery. All right, and in terms of tools or lenses that we apply to our work every day, I think this is, if you're not already riveted, this is where it gets interesting. Something we use every day in our work, both to keep us honest, to keep our clients honest, and try to keep our work grounded in things that are actually going to have a positive impact and that we can substantiate, is life cycle assessment or life cycle thinking, right? We haven't sold or performed a single formal LCA where you have a 100-page document and it's stamped by an engineer and you have a subscription to an emissions factors database and have it all modeled. We haven't done any of that, but what we are using in our work every day is the knowledge of how to do that, how to take pieces of a complete LCA and rapidly help an organization get to what they want to know. Supply chain mapping is an interest of mine, and I'm involved with an organization now called SourceMap as their sort of external director of strategy, and they are an MIT startup that's doing supply chain mapping using a new type of graph database technology to shine a light on what supply chains actually look like, how to manage them, where the impacts happen, and really cool stuff. And the third is simply having that grounded knowledge of the fundamentals of renewable energy. By that I mean what it was like to build a tiny house that runs off the grid, to actually know what a battery bank full of very heavy lead acid batteries means in terms of your daily life, and translating that into what it means to help a major bank go carbon neutral. How many wind turbines is that? How is the electricity stored? What type of additionality are we claiming from that project? It all comes full circle. But the life cycle thinking, I can't overstate the importance of this, whether it's your Uncle Dave at the holiday party saying, I just read on Fox News that the Tesla really isn't that green as a car because it comes from the same dirty grid that we're all plugged into. So, okay, are you going to engage in an argument with Uncle Dave, a fight? Are you going to start to bring the science to Uncle Dave? How do you deal with a comment like that? You have to go back to the data. So for me, it was being taught how to do an LCA step by step, where that data lives, and how to apply it strategically in the right conversations, sometimes picking our battles and telling Uncle Dave he's right, that the grid could be a lot greener than it is, and that that car still effectively runs on coal. But maybe being able to point to a study that breaks down the answer to his question or claim. So where we see this work with brands is that they're applying a life cycle thinking to their own product development or to their marketing messaging. And the ones who are doing it responsibly, the ones that we're associated with, are brands like the VF companies, for example, or in this case, Levi's, that's outside of that realm, but they were one of the first to commission a comprehensive LCA on some of their classic products. What is the true life cycle impact of these blue jeans? And they did this before anybody else was really measuring impact this way. And they realized that it was customer usage or customer care and the raw material itself that were the lion's share of the emissions, of the water impact of that product throughout its life cycle. So they actually invested in getting the data and kind of using that to support how they went to market and told their customers to wash their jeans more. So it's a very micro example, but over and over again, we apply this in the work that we do because you have to come back to the science at the end of the day. The other thing that LCA does is it gives you multiple perspectives. So I can flip back and forth between energy and water, and then some folks are very interested in some of the other factors that come off of that, like eutrophication or localized pollution that impacts human health because of where the power generation is located that manufactures products. So LCA gives you a toolkit to be able to have those conversations, whether it's with Uncle Dave or a senior manager, and to have them backed up by data. And I cannot understate the importance and what this has meant for our organization, our ability to win work, our ability to back up the work that we've done, and it's just been great. On the supply chain mapping side, this is sort of a new frontier because SourceMap is a startup out of MIT, and not every company is doing this. But increasingly what we know in the sustainability world is that some of the world's most valuable brands and products are made with some of the world's most at-risk ingredients. So we're talking about palm oil, okay? We're talking about any material that's made from, in a rainforest environment, in a vulnerable environment, and even mainstream ingredients. US corn, wheat, the entire world of raw materials is being reshaped by these massive issues like climate change. So increasingly, in the corporate consulting world, brands want to be able to say, not in my supply chain. Defensively, they don't want to end up as a headline. Offensively, they want to understand what exposure they actually have to these global factors that are reshaping everything about the world we know, okay? And beyond environmental harm or environmental impact, this brings us into the realm of human impact. Because I think often we look at a tree plantation and we think of it as trees in the ground and carbon, but if you're in a material like cocoa or coffee, you're talking about some of the poorest farmers in the world, maybe just farming a few hectares at a time, and their kids aren't in school, and they have to walk long distances to a water source, and they sell these commodity materials through a number of traders and middlemen that the brands who want to make all these sustainability claims have no visibility into, or traditionally did not. So my work in supply chain mapping is focused on helping to make impossible or invisible supply chain data visible to people who previously had no business knowing. or had no way to know because their data that they saw was in some purchasing database on who they bought from, but that's where it ended. So this new technology gives them the ability to do deeper discoveries and to find out who makes just about anything. Right? And it's not an automagical process where you put in the Levi's jean or a particular product into this, and out comes a magic traceable chain of custody, right? That can take years, it can take discovery, it can take supplier engagement, but the process, the technology of being able to map a client's supply chain, even just to the level of visibility they have today, sets the stage for a whole bunch of really exciting investigations. All right, so what you're looking at here is a snapshot from the SourceMap software, some of which is open source and online. They have a website called Open SourceMap at open.sourcemap.com where you can make one of these. But this is the science and the art, for that matter, of visualizing the complex relationships that exist between supply chains with nodes and links and the actual flows of goods. So here you're looking at a multi-tiered supply chain that consists of first-tier suppliers, largely whom are known to the company that starts this process, second-tier suppliers that supply those first-tier, and then company-owned facilities. And this is a very limited number. Often you'll get tens of thousands of points as you start to investigate into sub-tiers. Who supplies your suppliers? So you need this type of network database or software to be able to make sense of this, because you just get to a point in an Excel spreadsheet where collecting this data is a mess and needs to be automated, so you need an online portal to go and collect the data, store it, and also to visualize it, to be able to take action. So what you can do with this, if you're a third partner's client, you can say, are we having a positive or negative impact on deforestation? Well, the state of the art, the kind of status quo, is that they might have a zero deforestation policy that relies on certificates, FSC or fair trade or certified organic. But if you just Google, let's say, sustainable cocoa or responsible cocoa this past week, you'll notice that that's not enough, right? Same thing with responsible palm. We've had standards like the RSPO and these designations that get stamped on products and ingredients for years, but the impacts in the first mile, if you ask anyone who's been there and the people themselves who work in the first mile of these supply chains, largely have not improved, certainly not at the pace that any of us are happy with. So what you can do with this tech is first map the supply chain down to the most detailed level of resolution possible by getting data collection, not just from who you do business with today, but asking the mill or the processor to give you a manifest, to give you a bill of lading, showing where all the farms are located that supply that mill. Now you start to get thousands of points on a map, and you overlay satellite deforestation data that's open source. You can go on Global Forest Watch, and you can see all of this in high resolution. But when you overlay these 2 points, this really high resolution external data with internal data from a company's supply chain, you're able to click a button and do a heat map and overlay those 2 points and know that this supplier here is somebody you should look at. You should send the auditor there. You should intervene. You should figure out what's going on because they're located on a parcel of land that meets the definition of deforestation. So this is very much cutting edge. The brands that are doing anything about deforestation and social impact have traditionally relied on external certifications, and this is all about going a step beyond. So largely this work is done as an internal investigation with the chief procurement officer, chief sustainability officer, because you want to understand your position before you broadcast it. But if you're a firm like VF that has mapped your supply chain at a product level, they actually did something that I refer to as transparency. It's different than traceability. Traceability is the process of assembling this complete picture of what your supply chain looks like. Transparency is about pushing it into the market and broadcasting it as a responsible message. So they have a microsite within their CSR site where you can click through some of these iconic products like the Wrangler jeans or the Lee jeans or JanSport backpack, and you can actually see what the supply chain looks like, interact with it, and click on icons that map up with their corporate sustainability strategy and look at particular vendors that are exemplifying those principles, whether it's chemical responsibility or recycled materials, waste efficiency. They've gone and engaged all of their suppliers all the way down to the raw material and put it out there for the world to see. So you have to have a really tight control of your supply chain. You have to have a very strong definition of what sustainability even means at all of these different points, because each of these factories is doing something different. Some are dying and are going to have dyeing the materials and have wastewater effluent. And others are converting that material or spinning it or doing some other process and have huge energy use. It might even be burning primary fuels like diesel on site because they're located in areas where the power grid doesn't work. So this is a very, very in-depth process that wasn't possible before technology to be able to go out and gather all this data from each point. So sometimes it's the factories themselves responding to questionnaires, uploading information about their business practices, but increasingly as that information, as more and more brands that work with the same facility are all asking similar questions, you see audit sharing databases and common platforms popping up to be able to facilitate that type of analysis. So really exciting stuff. And you can also check out this map on VF's site. I think they call it VF Traceability Maps. And this is where to go if you want to create a supply chain map as part of your own research or work. It's a little painstaking in this kind of free version. You have to build your chain one click at a time, and it will be public, not private, but you can play around with some maps that have been made. All right. And the last thing that has served me and my team really well is a strong grasp on the fundamentals of renewable energy. So this picture is actually taken a few days ago by my friend who followed in my footsteps. He is also building an off-the-grid house in kind of a similar region, 2 hours from here in the upper Delaware region. It's where the Delaware River begins and the headwaters of the Delaware River. So the town that everybody knows is like Narrowsburg or Barryville. We're north of that. We're way out there. But this is a baby monitor. And instead of it watching his infant daughter, he's got it watching his solar power inverter. And he sent this to me the other day to show me how clever it was that he took this thing up. And I took a look at the numbers and I said, state of charge, 25%. What are you doing? You're going to destroy your batteries. You just got this system. You can't have them down that low. But when you live off the grid or when you build one of these systems, this becomes your baby because the grid isn't there for you all the time. This is a completely islanded power system. So it is our baby, and he's now monitoring it remotely with a camera pointed at his control panel way down there where the sun is shining on this solar-powered pergola, so he can monitor it when he's up in the house. But you know, my team started basically tinkering and experimenting with solar. We built this installation for a customer. It's a rooftop, off-the-grid solar workstation that was supposed to connect employees to the science and technology of solar energy so that it wasn't just about that company putting panels on their roof or buying renewable energy credits. This was, all right, we're going to go out here and work for a day, and there are batteries inside the bench, and we're on an islanded system. So we basically got a firm to contribute an engineering schematic and got an electrician and project manage this thing as a result of the kind of tinkerer renewable energy knowledge that I'd acquired from building this off-grid house. But we actually got paid to build this thing, and it was pretty cool. And this knowledge really scales fast. So I mentioned earlier the wind project that we were involved in. Different level. This is about wind finance and off-site structures called virtual PPAs. But it's really the same thing. It's about understanding that if a company's making a bold commitment to carbon neutrality, covering Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, we have to be able to advise them on what's possible. And frankly, our clients don't know when we walk in the door that they can't just put panels on their parking garage and become 100% carbon neutral in Scope 1. They can't even get 5% of the way there. So we've evolved, you know, from doing those demonstration scale projects, from living off the grid and tinkering and having a real respect for what a kilowatt hour is, because we're up there in our tiny houses experiencing it. We've evolved that and translated it into some very, very big projects. In terms of things that keep us up at night, within those two classes of sustainability services that we're involved in, there's still some inertia when it comes to the right side of the equation, creating demand for new solutions that really change the future, especially in corporate sustainability consulting, where we are moving at the speed of a lot of other stakeholders in the organization. One of the biggest barriers is that respect to any CFOs in the audience, but in our experience, CFO doesn't really care about sustainability or about when it's just called sustainability, yet and in most cases, being the asterisk. So when we think about marketing our services or being a sustainability consultancy, We bucket what we do, which is our deliverables, like doing a benchmarking study or doing a green building design or helping with supply chain visibility. And we try to categorize those offerings in ways that align with these decision makers within companies that are hiring us. So only a couple grow revenue, and you could even say facilities, health, and efficiency is kind of a stretch in terms of it's going to bring in more revenue for a company. It's going to help them compete for the best talent, which is going to help them bring in the best revenue, but there's no direct impact on revenue. Really, the common language is in the risk reduction space. Also, companies we find aren't all that motivated by lowering operating expenses. Talking to the COO and the operations organization, it's a nice to have, but most of the organizations we work with are much more concerned about growing the top line and quarterly reports and performance than they are about shaving a couple of percentage points off of their energy bill. So the ship has kind of sailed for us on getting involved in traditional energy efficiency within facilities. But we think that the most fertile ground for having a shared understanding amongst not only the CFO, but the other C-suite decision makers, is this concept of long-term impact tied to risk. The challenge that we have is the short-termism that exists within most companies. And that's not something we're going to change on our own. It's something that takes forward-thinking leaders and the right data to be able to crack. Because obviously, tomorrow's long-term risk is, in the short term, you need to be putting in place an action plan or some kind of steps to get ahead of that. But it's not always that clear. So we have this sustainability data that's all over organizations. It's very siloed and it's very undervalued. In our experience, the people who know that sustainability data is important are the CSO. They know it's important to raters and rankers, and in the investor relations crowd, the CEO knows it's important to recruiting talent and sending the right message. But where that data is really undervalued is on the procurement side, where the contract is going to be awarded to XYZ vendor who can deliver at the best quality, lead time, meet the spec, you name it, and not necessarily because that company is committed to renewable energy. So there's a lot of inertia there, but a ton of opportunity with that supply chain mapping and the risk side of things. And the operations side of the business too, the data is really, really siloed. So a company's facilities data might have nothing to do with its long-term exposure to climate change. It's really all about maybe their agricultural inputs or the goods that are coming in the first mile, and that data might live within an agronomist or within somebody in their R&D department, but isn't really being shared with the folks who put together the 10K report, the sustainability report, the integrated report. And there are frameworks coming down the pike that are going to change that. One is TCFD. We see this as a big emerging trend, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It's basically a movement to realign sustainability reporting with things that really matter. So to turn reporting from kind of a box-checking exercise where you can fill out all the info on your company's practices and be scored against others and benchmarked against others, to a really hard-edged look at how climate change and how issues in our entire global market system are overlapping with sustainability concerns. So this is an area to watch, something we're going to be heavily involved in. It's also, if you can unlock the data silos that exist in an organization, you have a prayer at working with companies on a framework like this. But the data is all over the place to be able to make these types of decisions. Another piece of inertia we see, I'd call it more than green marketing at this point. I've got this example from Lyft. All Lyft rides are now carbon neutral, right? How many people knew about that as Lyft or Uber users? Okay, a few hands going up. All right. So I'm not going to pick apart their announcement, right? It's a great thing to be doing something. But I pulled an article here from Gizmodo that there's an additionality to this ride-hailing service by putting a taxi cab in the hand of every living, breathing human. In New York alone, ride-hailing apps added 600 million miles of vehicular travel to the city's roadway network over a 3-year period, even after you isolate and correct for the rides that were replaced from personal automobiles and traditional liveries. So we just get into this question of not how legitimate is this claim or how exciting is their carbon neutral program, but as a sustainability consultant, scientist, somebody who really wants to impact the world, how do we go a step beyond neutral and maybe talk about regenerative? Or how do we factor in the additionality, the additional economic growth, the impact that this transformational technology, this model has had on this one particular system, and factor that into our carbon neutral strategy? I would say the state of things right now is that the top 10% or even top few percent of responsible companies, the ones that really want to be known as the good guy, which Lyft is compared to their peer, are willing to write a check, maybe even in this case a few $1,000,000, to negate their carbon emissions, to hire a firm to do the accounting. But this step of thinking about their business more holistically, in the 600 million mile question, is a step beyond. So it's not always our job to be the instigator in these conversations and say, yeah, but this is a brilliant program, but there's some additionality here, or what does your roadmap to electrification look like? When we go down that rabbit hole, we end up in a whole bunch of socioeconomic factors, like where are all the jobs going to go for drivers once those cars are electrified and autonomous, right? So we're all in this journey together. And my perspective on it is that companies and their consultants are really just one piece in this entire ecosystem of sustainability, and that we shouldn't claim to be an overly large piece. So I want to send a message that companies will not solve climate change. Maybe the company that creates limitless carbon-free energy will solve climate change, but those aren't the companies paying us to work for them today as sustainability consultants. These are the people who make things that we put in our bodies and on our bodies largely, and that we use every day. So we're one cog on this journey, but we need to bring in a perspective of our personal ethics and our own moral compass, a really honest and technical knowledge of energy and infrastructure, some awareness of government and policy, partnerships with NGOs, especially to engage on sticky issues that are happening a world away where my team will never go, like farmers in West Africa, in cocoa, for example. There's always going to be partnerships. Academia, and then the traditional standards and certifications are out there, but perhaps there really isn't one that exists that's as ubiquitous as like ISO is for quality, that really gets at the heart of the material sustainability issues that a company would address in order to be doing as much as humanly possible. Maybe that's something that we're all chasing together. All right. So that's a little bit of a day in the life, told through the lens of projects, and I just want to say thanks for your attention, and I'll take questions with the time we have left.